and see if it's true or false. In fact, if you have used ChatGPT to do some deep learning or complex problem solving, it is almost certain that you have already learned something that was wrong. And the reason I can say that with such certainty is because of how LLMs like ChatGPT are built. ChatGPT is not connected to some universal source of truth. It has no concept of what the truth actually is. LLMs work through a probability network. They take your context and your query, they form a probability network, and then they think about what is the most high probability word that would come next in this sequence. Recently, Apple released this white paper that has been going viral and making the rounds, which showed that ChatGPT and other LLMs are not actually capable of advanced reasoning. It's barely capable of reasoning at all beyond the most basic level. And this is not at all surprising, because those who use AI believing it's helping them when it's actually sabotaging their learning. In the first place, let's think about the process of learning. There's a lot of great research out on how learning happens. And what we know is that when you receive information, and this information can come from any kind of source, when that enters into our brain has to do a series of different types of thoughts to organize this information and make it make sense. And so this is this golden step where learning actually happens, called information processing. When you do this processing really well, that's when you get a good memory, when you are able to build expertise. All the things that we want when we learn are achieved by doing this processing really well. Now, the key is that when you learn correctly, you spend a lot of time in this part. You spend a lot of time doing the processing, and this is the part that involves a high amount of effort. This is a lot of mental exertion happening in this step. And it makes sense, because to process correctly, that allows you to develop a good memory and to have deep expertise on what you learned. You can't just look at the information superficially. You have to actually actively connect to this. You have to compare that information. You have to think about it in relation to a big picture. And you have to eventually form what we call a schema of knowledge. Now, when we think about learning through something like books or lectures or just using Google search, the information is here. And the information is not exactly packaged in the easiest way for your brain to process necessarily. And so to make it make sense in our brain, we have to go through this very active process of organizing the information and evaluating it. Now, the difference with AI and using things like ChatGPT is that it seems that we are able to skip this step. We can actually bypass the processing part. So instead of having to connect it and compare it and think about a big picture, we can just go straight from having the information, prompting ChatGPT to help organize it and make sense of it for us so that it feels easier and more intuitive and simpler to understand. And all of this creates what's called the illusion of learning. And it stems from the fact that we believe that when we understand something that we read, we have learned it. And that is absolutely not true. Just because you can understand something that you read doesn't mean that the information is going to stick into your memory or that you can use that information in the way that you need to use it, especially if you need to use the information for things like complex problem solving. And so what happens is that we will use ChatGPT and other AI in order to extract information, and instead of doing all of this effortful processing, we will just prompt it again and again to make it easier to understand so that we understand it, and therefore we've fallen into the trap of the illusion of learning. We assume that we will have a better memory of this, that we will actually be able to retain it, and that we will be able to use that information with correct expertise to solve problems and make decisions. But that is not the case, because it is this process in the middle that takes effort, this processing part, doing these things, creating the schema, that actually creates the memory and the expertise. By bypassing that process, we are also bypassing the result completely. To make matters worse, when you get used to bypassing this process, your brain doesn't develop the habit of processing it effectively. Which means that if a new topic has been overwhelming for you and therefore you use ChatGPT to make it less overwhelming because you don't know how to process it yourself, that topic will always be hard for you because you will never develop the skill and the thought patterns necessary to actually organize it for yourself. And if it wasn't bad enough, to make matters worse, we now also need to think about the fact that your AI is hallucinating. If you're not familiar, hallucinating means that the AI is generating text that is not necessarily true. And so if you don't already have expertise on a domain, you don't even know enough to be able to check it and see if it's true or false. In fact, if you have used ChatGPT to do some deep learning or complex problem solving, it is almost certain that you have already learned something that was wrong. And the reason I can say that with such certainty, LLMs like ChatGPT are built. ChatGPT is not